There is something that has become painfully obvious in the world we live in today. Everything is loud. Not just loud in sound, but loud in opinion, loud in emotion, loud in pressure, loud in expectation. Everywhere you turn, something is demanding your attention. Voices telling you who you should be, what you should believe, how you should live, what you should fear, and what you should chase. And if you are not careful, you will find yourself carried away by the current of it all, without even realizing that your spirit has become exhausted. And I want you to understand something very deeply. The human soul was never designed to live in constant noise. There is a sacred place within every person where God speaks, but that place becomes difficult to recognize when the world is shouting louder than your spirit can respond. The tragedy is not that God is silent. The tragedy is that we have become so surrounded by noise that we no longer recognize his whisper. I have seen it again and again in the hearts of people. Confusion that is not born from lack of intelligence but from overload. Too many voices, too many opinions, too many directions pulling at once. And when everything is speaking at the same time, even truth can feel distant. Even peace can feel unreachable. Even faith can feel weak. Not because it has disappeared, but because it has been buried under the weight of everything else competing for attention. And this is where the struggle begins. Because the world does not merely suggest, it insists. It pushes, it rushes, it pressures you into urgency. It tells you that if you are not moving fast enough, you are falling behind. It tells you that silence is wasteful, that stillness is unproductive, that waiting is losing. And slowly, without realizing it, the soul becomes conditioned to constant movement, constant input, constant noise. But the Spirit of God does not compete in noise. The Holy Spirit does not scream above the chaos of the world. He calls, he draws, he whispers. And that is why so many miss him, not because he is absent, but because they are accustomed to everything except stillness. There comes a moment in every life when you realize that the loudest voices are not always the truest voices. In fact, many times the loudest voices are the most confusing. They stir anxiety but never bring clarity. They create urgency but never bring peace. They multiply options but never give direction. And the soul begins to thirst, not for more information but for truth that settles the heart. And I tell you, there is a difference between hearing and being led. You can hear many things and still be lost. But when the Holy Spirit begins to lead you, even if it is a gentle leading, even if it is quiet, there is something within you that recognizes it as home. It does not produce confusion. It does not produce fear. It does not fracture your spirit into pieces. It gathers you. It centers you. It brings you back into alignment. But the challenge is this. Many people do not realize how deeply they are influenced by noise until they try to be still. And in that stillness, everything rises to the surface. Thoughts they ignored, emotions they suppressed, questions they avoided. And instead of staying in that place long enough for God to bring order, they return to noise again, mistaking distraction for comfort. Yet I want you to understand this very clearly. Clarity is not found in more noise, but in separation from it. Direction is not found in acceleration, but in alignment. Peace is not found in louder answers, but in deeper listening. And there is a sacred invitation being extended even now. Not an invitation to escape life, but to step out of its overwhelming noise long enough to hear what has been speaking underneath it all along. Because God has not stopped speaking. The Holy Spirit has not withdrawn. But he is calling you into a different frequency. One that cannot be accessed through rush, cannot be heard through anxiety, and cannot be received through distraction. It requires something of you. It requires surrender of the noise. It requires the willingness to pause what is loud so you can finally recognize what is true. And when you do, something within you begins to shift. What once felt chaotic begins to lose its authority. What once felt overwhelming begins to lose its power. Because in that quiet place, you begin to realize something you had forgotten. You were never meant to be led by noise. There is something I want you to see very clearly now. Beneath all the noise, beneath all the confusion, beneath all the pressure of living in this world, there is a deep unspoken need in the human heart that no amount of intelligence, success, or human effort can satisfy. It is the need for direction that does not fail you. It is the need for guidance that does not mislead you. It is the need for wisdom that is higher than your own understanding. And I tell you, many people do not realize how much they are struggling with this until they reach a place where their own thinking no longer feels sufficient. There comes a moment when human reasoning begins to feel heavy. Choices that once seemed simple now feel layered with uncertainty. Paths that once looked clear begin to blur. And the heart quietly begins to ask, where do I go from here? This is not weakness. This is not weakness. This is the natural condition of a soul that was never designed to carry the weight of life alone. You were never meant to be your own final authority. You were never meant to rely solely on what you can calculate, predict, or control. There is a limit to human wisdom, and when that limit is reached, the soul begins to feel it in the form of anxiety, restlessness, and inner conflict. And yet, what do most people do in that moment? They try harder, they think more, they consult more voices, they gather more opinions. They analyze every possible outcome, hoping that somewhere in the multiplication of human ideas, clarity will appear. But confusion does not heal itself by increasing input. In fact, too much input often deepens the confusion. I want you to understand something very important. When the heart is burdened with decisions that feel too heavy, it is not merely asking for information, it is asking for direction that carries peace within it. Because true guidance does not only tell you where to go, it also strengthens you to go there without fear. And this is where the deeper need reveals itself. It is not simply the need to know what is right. It is the need to be assured within your spirit that you are not walking blindly, that you are not alone in your decisions, that there is a presence that sees further than you can see, understands more than you can understand, and gently leads you step by step when your own vision becomes limited. I have seen people reach points in life where no human advice satisfies them anymore. They have heard every perspective, they have considered every option, and still something within them remains unsettled. That unsettledness is not there to torment you, it is there to push you beyond dependence on human limitation and into dependence on divine wisdom. Because the truth is, human direction can inform you, but it cannot carry you. It can suggest, but it cannot guarantee peace. It can advise, but it cannot see the full picture of your life. And deep within, the soul knows this. That is why even after making decisions based on logic alone, many still feel an emptiness of assurance. But when the Holy Spirit begins to guide, something entirely different happens. Even when the path is unfamiliar, there is a quiet confirmation within. Even when the outcome is not fully visible, there is a steady assurance that you are not lost. It is not the absence of questions, but the presence of peace in the midst of them. And this is what the human heart is truly longing for, not just answers, but alignment. Not just decisions, but divine confirmation. Not just clarity of mind, but peace of spirit that remains even when circumstances are still unfolding. And I tell you, when you finally reach the place where you acknowledge that your wisdom is not enough, that your understanding has limits, and that your strength alone cannot carry every decision, that is not the beginning of defeat. That is the beginning of surrender. And in that surrender, something sacred begins to open. Because the Holy Spirit does not compete with self-sufficiency. He waits for surrender. And when the heart finally says, "I cannot do this alone," it becomes ready to be led in a way it has never been led before. And in that moment, direction is no longer something you strain to find. It becomes something you are gently led into. And now we come to a place that many people desire but very few are willing to enter, the place of silence. Not silence of the lips alone, but silence of the inner world, the quieting of thoughts, the stilling of restless emotions, the setting aside of everything that competes for your attention. Because I tell you, the Holy Spirit is not far from you, but he is often hidden beneath the noise you refuse to lay down. There is something very sacred about silence. It is not empty, as many think. It is full of awareness, full of truth, full of divine presence that you cannot perceive while everything else is shouting at you. And yet, this is where the struggle lies, because silence is uncomfortable to the modern soul. We have become so accustomed to stimulation that stillness feels like absence, when in reality, it is invitation. And I want you to see this clearly. The Holy Spirit is not waiting for you in your busyness. He is not competing with your distractions. He is not striving to get your attention in the middle of everything else you are giving yourself to. He meets you in the place where you choose to withdraw from the noise and turn your attention fully toward him. But this requires intention. It does not happen by accident. You do not drift into spiritual clarity. You enter into it deliberately. You step away from what is loud so that what is true can begin to rise within you. And at first, when you do this, everything within you resists it. Thoughts you ignored begin to speak. Emotions you postponed begin to surface. Concerns you buried begin to reappear. And many people, when they first encounter this, assume something is wrong. But I tell you, nothing is wrong. This is simply what happens when noise is removed. Everything that noise was covering begins to reveal itself. And instead of running from it, the Holy Spirit invites you to stay, because it is in that very place of exposure that healing begins. You see, the reason many never hear the Holy Spirit clearly is not because he is not speaking, but because they never remain still long enough to recognize the way he speaks. His voice is not like the voice of fear that rushes you. It is not like the voice of anxiety that scatters you. It is not like the voice of confusion that divides you. His voice gathers you inwardly. It steadies you. It brings a quiet knowing that does not demand explanation to be real. But to recognize that voice, you must learn to sit in stillness without trying to fill it. And this is where many struggle, because silence feels like emptiness to a mind that is used to constant input. So they quickly reach for something, anything to fill the space again. A conversation, a device, a distraction, a thought. Anything to avoid the discomfort of being still. Yet I tell you, that very discomfort is often the doorway to clarity. Because what feels like emptiness is actually space being created for divine communication. And the Holy Spirit does not force his way into a crowded heart. He is gentle. He waits. He speaks when you are willing to listen rather than fill. And when you finally remain there, when you resist the urge to escape, when you stay even though it feels unfamiliar, something begins to happen that cannot be explained easily. The noise within you begins to lose its authority. The urgency begins to soften. The confusion begins to separate into clarity. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, like dawn breaking after a long night. And in that quiet breaking, you begin to realize something powerful. You are not alone in the silence. In fact, you are more aware of his presence there than you ever were in the noise. Because the Holy Spirit has always been near, but now you are finally aware enough to notice him. And that awareness changes everything. Because in that sacred silence, you are no longer reaching for God. You are finally hearing him. And now I want to take you deeper, because once you begin to step away from the noise and enter into that quiet place, something very important must happen within you. You must learn to recognize the voice of the Holy Spirit. Not every voice you hear within you is his voice. Not every impression, not every thought, not every feeling is divine leading. And this is where many become confused, because everything within them begins to sound important when they have not learned the difference between noise and guidance. I tell you, the Holy Spirit does not speak in confusion. He does not divide your spirit into fear and contradiction. He does not lead you into agitation or inner turmoil. His voice carries a distinct nature that your spirit can recognize when you are truly listening. It is gentle, yet it is firm. It is quiet, yet it is undeniable. It does not push you into panic, it draws you into peace. And I want you to understand something very carefully. The Holy Spirit is not trying to compete with your emotions. He is not trying to shout louder than your thoughts. He speaks to a deeper place within you, a place that is not governed by fluctuation or instability. That is why when he speaks, even if the instruction is challenging, there is still a calmness underneath it. But when fear speaks, it rushes you. It compresses time. It creates urgency without clarity. When anxiety speaks, it scatters your thoughts in multiple directions at once. When confusion speaks, it multiplies options but removes peace. And if you are not discerning, you will mistake urgency for guidance and emotion for truth. This is why discernment is so vital. Because not everything that feels strong is spiritual. Not everything that feels urgent is God-led. And not everything that sounds reasonable is aligned with divine purpose. The Holy Spirit is not merely concerned with what looks right on the surface. He is concerned with what carries peace in the depth of your spirit. And I tell you, there is a very simple but profound way to begin recognizing his voice. It always brings you into alignment, never fragmentation. It may correct you, but it will not condemn you. It may challenge you, but it will not destroy your peace. It may redirect you, but it will not leave you in confusion. Many people expect the voice of God to be dramatic, loud, overwhelming. But most often, it is not found in dramatic moments. It is found in subtle clarity. It is that quiet knowing that remains after everything else has been stripped away. It is that steady impression that does not fade even when emotions try to resist it. It is that inward confirmation that persists even when circumstances are not yet visible. And I want to tell you something very important. The Holy Spirit will often repeat his leading, not through volume, but through consistency. What he places within you will continue to return in stillness. It will not leave you in peace until you either accept it or deliberately ignore it. And even in his persistence, there is no pressure, only invitation. But you must also understand this. The more you ignore that gentle leading, the harder it becomes to recognize it. Not because he stops speaking, but because your sensitivity begins to dull under the weight of distraction and resistance. And slowly, what once felt clear begins to feel distant. Not because God has moved, but because your attention has shifted elsewhere. Yet the beautiful truth is this: sensitivity can be restored, discernment can be sharpened again. The ability to recognize his voice can return with greater clarity than before when the heart turns back towards stillness and surrender. And when you begin to walk in that sensitivity again, something remarkable happens within you. Decisions no longer feel like chaos. Direction no longer feels like pressure. Life no longer feels like guessing. There is a quiet assurance that begins to settle over your inner world, not because everything is revealed at once, but because you are no longer walking alone in your understanding. You begin to realize that guidance is not about hearing more voices. It is about finally recognizing the right one. And now we come to something that every human heart longs for, whether they realize it or not. Peace. Not the kind of peace that depends on circumstances. Not the kind of peace that only exists when everything is going well. But a deeper peace, a living peace, a sustaining peace that remains even when life is uncertain, even when answers are delayed, even when the future is not yet clear. I tell you, many people search for peace in places that can never sustain it. They search for it in success, in relationships, in achievements, in approval, in control. And for a moment, these things may soothe the mind, but they cannot anchor the soul. Because anything that is dependent on external conditions will always be fragile. And so the heart continues to move from one source to another, trying to find something that does not collapse under pressure. But there is a peace that does not come from the world. There is a peace that does not depend on understanding every detail of your life. There is a peace that exists even when your questions remain unanswered. And this is the peace that the Holy Spirit brings into the human heart. And I want you to see something very clearly. This peace is not the absence of trouble. It is the presence of divine steadiness within trouble. It does not remove storms from your life, but it anchors you so deeply that the storm no longer defines your inner condition. And this is where many are surprised, because they assume that when God is with them, everything around them will immediately become easy. But I tell you, the greater miracle is not always the removal of the situation. The greater miracle is the transformation of the heart within the situation. It is when you can stand in uncertainty and yet not be consumed by fear. It is when you can wait without anxiety overtaking you. It is when you can walk through difficulty and still feel a quiet assurance that you are not abandoned. This is the work of the Holy Spirit within the believer. He does not only guide you in direction, he stabilizes you in spirit. He becomes the inner witness that you are not alone. And that inner witness begins to silence the voices of panic, the voices of doubt, the voices of despair that try to rise when circumstances feel overwhelming. And I tell you, there are moments in life when everything outwardly may still look unchanged, yet inwardly something has shifted completely. The same situation remains, but your reaction to it is different. The same uncertainty exists, but it no longer rules your emotions. The same unanswered questions are present, but they no longer control your peace. This is what it means to be held by the Holy Spirit in the midst of life's pressures. It is not denial of reality, it is a higher reality governing your inner world. It is a peace that passes understanding, not because there is nothing to understand, but because the peace itself is stronger than the need to understand everything immediately. And I want to tell you something very personal in this truth. When the Holy Spirit begins to establish peace within you, he often does it gently. It does not always come in a dramatic moment. Sometimes it comes in a quiet surrender. Sometimes it comes in a single breath of release when you finally stop trying to control what you cannot control. Sometimes it comes when you say, even through uncertainty, I will trust. And in that moment of surrender, something begins to settle. The inner tension begins to loosen. The racing thoughts begin to slow. The emotional weight begins to lift. Not because everything has been solved, but because you are no longer carrying it alone. And I tell you, this peace becomes a testimony. Because people around you may not understand how you are still standing, how you are still calm, how you are still moving forward when things are uncertain. But they do not see what is happening within you. They do not see the quiet hand of the Holy Spirit stabilizing your inner world. And once you have experienced this kind of peace, you begin to realize something very powerful. Peace is not something you find. It is someone who finds you. And when he rests upon your heart, even in the middle of everything that is uncertain, you are kept. And now we come to the place where everything must become real in your life. Not just hearing, not just feeling, not just being moved in moments of reflection, but actually walking in what you have received. Because I tell you, it is one thing to sense the Holy Spirit's direction, but it is another thing entirely to obey it. Many people desire clarity, but they hesitate when clarity arrives. They ask for guidance, but when guidance requires movement, surrender, or change, they pause. And I understand why. Because obedience often asks you to step beyond what is familiar. It asks you to trust what you cannot yet fully see. It asks you to let go of control and lean into something deeper than human certainty. But I want you to see something very important. The Holy Spirit does not lead you in circles. He does not guide you just to leave you where you are. When He brings clarity, it is always connected to movement. Even if that movement is small, even if it is gradual, even if it is just the next step, it is still movement in alignment with divine purpose. And I tell you, many miss the fullness of peace and direction because they are waiting for the entire path to be revealed at once. But the Holy Spirit rarely gives the whole picture in advance. He gives enough light for the next step, and that is where trust becomes real. Not in seeing everything, but in obeying what you have been shown. And this is where the soul is refined. Because obedience is not always emotional. Sometimes it feels uncertain. Sometimes it feels stretching. Sometimes it requires you to move without the comfort of full understanding. But in that very place of surrender, something begins to open within you that could not open any other way. I tell you, when you begin to obey the gentle leading of the Holy Spirit, even in small things, something powerful begins to happen. Confusion begins to lose its hold. Not because everything is instantly explained, but because you are now aligned with the one who sees beyond what you can see. And alignment brings clarity that analysis alone can never produce. And I want you to understand this deeply. Obedience is not about perfection. It is about responsiveness. It is the willingness to say, I will move when He speaks, even if I am still learning how to hear. It is the courage to follow peace even when fear tries to argue with it. It is the humility to let go of your own timing and trust His unfolding. And as you begin to walk in that obedience, something beautiful begins to develop within you. Sensitivity increases. The more you respond, the more clearly you recognize His leading. The more you trust, the more peace confirms your steps. The more you follow, the less confusing life becomes. Not because challenges disappear, but because you are no longer walking blindly. And I tell you, there is a moment that comes in every life of surrender, when you begin to look back and realize that what once felt like uncertainty was actually guidance all along. What once felt like delay was preparation. What once felt like loss was redirection. And what once felt like confusion was actually the Holy Spirit gently aligning you with something greater than what you originally planned. But this understanding only comes after obedience, not before it. Because clarity is often revealed in the walking, not in the waiting alone. The path becomes clearer as you move forward in trust. And I want to say this very gently to your heart. Do not delay what the Holy Spirit has already made clear to you in your spirit. Do not postpone obedience until you feel completely ready. Because readiness is often formed in the act of stepping forward, not in waiting for every fear to disappear. And when you begin to live this way, step by step, moment by moment, listening, responding, trusting, something changes within you that is beyond explanation. You begin to live with a quiet confidence, not because life is predictable, but because you are being led. Not because everything is visible, but because you are not alone in the journey. And in that place of daily obedience, you discover something profound. That direction is not just something you receive once, but something you walk in continually. And as you walk with Him, confusion fades, peace deepens, and your life begins to align with a purpose far greater than what you could have planned for yourself. And in the end, you realize this truth very clearly. The safest place you can ever be is in obedience to His voice.